So if you haven't been following along, this is my V6 turbocharged Magna, and we are fixing up with some upgrades. And that means I had to chop some stuff. So we are now going to paint it. And I'm going to show you guys how to get professional jobs like this in your shed. Let's get on to it.
Alright guys, so let's recap the last episode where I ended up trying to fit this big intercooler in and it not fitting. So I ended up chopping up the front of my car, welding a new section on, putting some primer on it, and now we're at this point where I need to paint it. Of course, painting does make a lot of mess, so that means we need to do some prep work before we can actually paint.
Now, while I'm in here pulling things apart, I'm a great believer in some preventative maintenance if you can do it, and this is definitely one of those things. This radiator has done over 200,000 kilometers, the original radiator, and yeah, pretty much I think the car deserves a bit of a birthday. It's not looking that great in here, as you can see, a bit yellow, not really what you want going through your engine. So we're throwing this out. Another thing I'm doing is a power steering line. It is not going to fit where it used to, so I have to bend that up and put that in a new place. But I'm going to paint it first, and then I'm going to do that later in the video. Same with this, putting a new one in, and it's going to be much shinier.
Of course, that's not the only thing I'm replacing. While I'm in here, I'm also doing the radiator hoses as well. Simply a screwdriver, flick it in, flick it out, you're done.
Right, now that everything's out of the way, you can see that I have painted these areas before, but I painted it in enamel, so we're going to have to get rid of all of that. What I'm going to be doing is I'm going to use thinners and try and get as much off as possible, and then we're going to sand it to get it ready for the 2-pack paint. Pretty much as you can see, the car's a lot dirtier than I thought. This is what happens when you pull things apart. You can see all the dirt and oh, it's gross, but it's going to look great once we're done. So let's start cleaning this up and getting it ready.
So thinners did absolutely nothing. So straight away I'm onto that wire wheel and I'm taking the whole lot back to bare metal, and I was shocked to see that this actually had a lot of hidden rust. Which, of course, once I saw that, that's why I took it back to metal, because I want to make sure that I get every little inch of rust and get rid of it. So that's what I'm doing.
So as they say, don't be a fool, cover your tool, and that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to cover the car so we don't get paint everywhere. Now, something you've got to remember is you can get full car covers like this, but in most situations you're going to be like me, you're not going to have enough car covers, so you use some of this stuff. This is plastic sheeting that will go over your car, but I ran out of it. So I went and nicked some of my wife's sheets and we're using them instead. Hopefully she doesn't mind.
Now that the car is semi-covered, we're getting onto the primer, and I'm using Raptor Acid Etch Primer. It does a great job. It's probably the best primer I've ever used out of a can, so highly recommend it. You put on that 3 coats, nice and even, until you are happy.
As you can see, it is the next day, and this is nice and dry and ready to be sanded. Now, I'm not going to be doing this by hand. I'm going to be using one of these. This is a sanding block, and with the correct sandpaper, I'm using 320. Probably a little bit thin, but you could do 180, but I'm using 320. We can make this nice and smooth. And then I'm just going to do a bit of hand stuff over this, just to clean up because it was pretty scratched up.
Now, a keen eye, of course, would have noticed that that is now blue, not grey. Why is that? It's because I use putty filler. Now, why I've done that is because when I weld it up there, it's not 100% smooth. This is just going to take any little imperfections out to make it a really good job. Now, you are meant to let this stuff dry before you paint it. This is where I stuffed up. I was talking to the camera, waving my hands around like a lunatic, and it ended up taking a huge chunk out.
So just, oh.
This is a sad man you are looking at here. Defeated. Destroyed. Now, of course, I wouldn't have actually been this way if I had just waited.
No.
So this is my recommendation to you guys. Wait until the next day. Take your time, don't rush it, or you could end up looking like this.
Alright, so let's talk about the most important thing to a paint job, your spray gun. And this is a gravity fed 1.4 nozzle spray gun with 3 adjustments. One, we got pressure. Let's turn that up. Very nice. Next thing is we've got how much liquid we want to get through there, or fluid. Turn this up. Oh, that's looking good. And next thing is the fan adjustment, which is this one here. And that's going to change the way the mist happens, like the spray pattern. Look at that. So you got to actually practice with this a fair bit to get what you desire. I recommend getting some cardboard and putting a little bit of mixture in there. Starting with thinners is fine. And just slowly getting at the adjustment you want. And once you've done that, you should have a good little spray pan. There we go. Well, now that you've figured out what your gun is going to spray like, it's time to put on a mask. Now, if you don't wear a mask, you are going to be going off into space, flying to Pluto, and destroy your lungs at the same time. So it's definitely worth to spend the right amount of money and get the correct mask. But anyway, this is all ready to go. So let's put some paint in there and start painting.
Now that we're finally getting some paint on this car, let's talk about air compressors. So my air compressor is a V-twin engine, 2.5 horsepower, belt driven. Now also it does 190 litres per minute, and that actually does a pretty good job for what I'm using it for. I like to run mine at 40 psi, but you can run it at 25 to 30 psi as well. It all is about personal preference and the paint you're using. Another thing you're going to need on your air compressor is a water trap. If you got one, 2 is even better. These things are amazing, and they're going to take that water and moisture out of the compressed air so it doesn't come through your gun and wreck your paint. Now that we've got all the equipment out of the way, let's talk about actually making some paint. So the mixture that I'm after is a 2-to-1 plus 15% thinners on top. Now this can get super confusing if you're using a 2-to-1 to 1 ruler like I am. So let's dive deep into this, and the first thing we got to do is put the paint up to the first letter A on the ruler. Now on the side here, I'm also going to put the measurements in millimeters to help everyone get their head around this. The next thing is Hana, and we need to run that up to the next A on the ruler. As you can see here, the mixture is now 2-to-1. But now we need to add the thinners, and this is the tricky part. The next A on this ruler is another 1 part, or 50% thinners on the actual paint, which ended up being 3 times more thinners than I actually needed. I'm happy to say that this did all work out for me, and I ended up with minimal runs. Now this is where a mixing cup would have come in handy if I was making a large amount of paint. These normally come in markings of 2 and 1 plus 10 and 20%. I ended up laying 3 coats of paint and waiting 15 to 20 minutes between coats and giving it a full week to harden.
Now as you can see, I've gone overboard again, and I've ended up painting extra bits and pieces because I thought it would look crappy if I didn't. Now this is painted, it's time to bolt everything up. Now I'm using stainless steel bolts just to tie everything in and make sure it lasts a long time. But all these threads have paint in them, and that's why we've got one of these. So let's clean out these threads and put these in and see what it looks like.
Now because the Mitsubishi Magna is an Australian made vehicle, we use the metric system, and that is the tap I'm using. I'm using an M6 by 1.0 pitch, which means for every 1mm we get 1 thread. Now there is no need to get too serious about this, we are just removing the paint, so any type of tap will work, and then all we have to do is put in some stainless steel goodness. For those who are wondering, we are hooking up the radiator with some stainless steel goodness as well. I've cleaned up the standard fans, hooking up to this new radiator, and it is going to work amazing. I just want to say that I've never had any issue with heat with the turbocharger on my car. The standard radiator has just always worked amazing with the fans.
And here we go, we've come full circle. The car is still apart, but that's okay, we're getting there. Last thing we need to do is fix some runs on the paint. Now most of this does look good. From the camera you probably can't really see, but if we zoom up, you can see that this thing does have some gnarly little runs in it. But we're going to fix it with a sanding pad and some water. Yes, water. But before we do, let's bust out a cool little tune. Yeah.
Well, that was cringe. Anyway, we want to keep things wet. Very, very wet. With wet and dry, you wet the sandpaper and then you sand with it. Pretty simple stuff. I'm using a block. We don't want to push too hard because we don't want to eat through that paint. We just want to take this nice and slowly, keeping it wet when you're sandpapering. Another thing I like to do is I like to check it out, dry it temporarily, and check where we are at. And as you can see, I'm getting through this nice and easy. And then it's all about polishing it. I did this on the front, and now I'm doing it on this little section using whatever I have on hand, which was a drill and this polishing bit made for metal. But it doesn't matter, it would do with some cutting compound and some normal polish.
And there you go, 5 minutes, mate, and that looks amazing. I mean, we could have gone a lot further. We could have hit this thing with 2,000, 5,000 wet and dry, put it on the compound, got a proper buffing wheel, polished it up for a part that is facing metal. That's right, you're actually never going to see this. This actually goes underneath the car and it presses up against the body, so you don't actually see this face. But it was good to show you guys a quick way of how to clean up your paintwork if you're new to it. Now that's said and done, I'm going to put this back on my car. And what I've decided to do was do another video on the power steering line because it's pretty involved and I want to show you guys how to do it. If you want to see that, then come along for the ride. If you haven't already, click the subscribe button right here and I'll see you on the next one. Like, subscribe, share to your mates because it makes me know that you love me. Thank you. And if you want to see me do that, how about you guys hit the subscribe button right here if you haven't already, like and share to your mates, and I will see you on the next one. Thank you for supporting me.